Welcome to another episode of Roots of Fear L. I'm your host, and today we delve into one of the most disturbing family legacies ever documented. The story of the Addingtons is not for the faint of heart. What began as a tale of ambition and prosperity quickly descended into something far more sinister. A darkness that would haunt the halls of Addington Manor for generations. Before we begin, I must caution you. The account you're about to hear has been pieced together from fragments of historical records, personal journals, and classified government documents that were never meant to see the light of day. Some of what I'll share with you tonight has been deliberately suppressed by authorities who believed the public wasn't ready for such revelations. Others would dismiss it as mere superstition or the ramblings of disturbed minds. But as you'll soon discover, the pattern that emerges across centuries is too consistent, too precise to be coincidence or collective delusion. For those sensitive viewers, this may be the moment to reconsider whether you wish to continue. The horrors of Addington Manor are not merely physical, but existential. They challenge our understanding of reality itself. They suggest that beneath the thin veneer of our ordered world lurks something vast and incomprehensible. Something that has used generations of a single family as its gateway into our reality. Consider yourself warned. The year was 1842 when Edward Addington, a shrewd businessman with unrelenting ambition, purchased a sprawling estate in the misty highlands of northern England. The manor, previously owned by the disgraced Blackwood family, came at a suspiciously low price. Local rumors suggested the property was cursed, but Edward dismissed such talk as provincial superstition. He saw only opportunity where others saw darkness, the first of many grave miscalculations that would define the Addington legacy. The region itself was steeped in ancient history, with Neolithic stone circles dotting the surrounding moors and prehistoric burial mounds nestled in the shadow of the estate. Archaeologists had long speculated that the area served as a significant ritual site for pre-Celtic cultures, theorizing that they chose this location because of some quality we might now describe as electromagnetic or geomagnetic anomalies. What ancient peoples interpreted as divine presence, modern science might attribute to unusual natural phenomena. But as our story unfolds, you may question whether such distinctions are as clear as we'd like to believe. Edward had made his fortune in coal and steel industries, built on the broken backs of laborers. The Industrial Revolution was transforming England, and Edward positioned himself at the bleeding edge of this transformation, quite literally, as the mortality rates in his factories were among the highest in the country. His mines descended deeper than any others, extracting coal from depths that his competitors deemed too dangerous or unprofitable to explore. Some of his miners spoke of strange fossils found in these deepest tunnels, remnants of creatures that defied classification, but such curiosities had a way of disappearing once reported to management. Edward's reputation for ruthlessness preceded him, but few knew the true extent of his cruelty. Those who crossed him had an uncanny habit of disappearing, their fates sealed behind closed doors with handshakes and whispers. The bodies of labor organizers occasionally washed up on the shores of the Thames, their tongues removed, a detail the newspapers tactfully omitted. Edward was a man who believed that power was not inherited but taken by whatever means necessary. His fascination with power extended beyond the material realm. Despite his public disdain for superstition, Edward maintained a private library of occult texts and employed a series of tutors to instruct him in ancient languages, Hebrew, Sanskrit, and others far more obscure. Visitors to his London home reported glimpsing strange gatherings in the evening hours, attended by some of the most influential figures in British society and politics. What transpired in these meetings was never discussed openly, but servants spoke in hushed tones of chanting, strange smells, and guests who departed, looking somehow diminished, as if something essential had been extracted from them. Upon moving into the manor with his young wife Eleanor and their 5 children, Edward commissioned extensive renovations. The workers were brought in from far away. None were local, as residents of nearby villages refused to set foot on the property. Most were immigrants desperate for work and unable to understand the warnings murmured in local taverns. Those who did speak English found their concerns dismissed or met with threats of deportation. The renovation crew lived in temporary quarters on the grounds, and from the beginning they reported strange occurrences. Many complained of odd noises in the walls, not the settling of an old house, but rhythmic tappings that seemed to follow patterns, almost like a code. Workers described sudden drops in temperature, even on warm summer days, cold spots so intense that their breath would fog and frost would form on their tools. Most disturbing was the unsettling feeling of being watched, particularly in the East Wing, where men refused to work alone. Edward hired a foreman known for his heavy-handed management style to keep the workers in line. Complaints were met with docked wages or immediate dismissal. Despite these measures, the project fell behind schedule as workers fled in the night, leaving their belongings behind rather than spend another hour at Addington Manor. 3 workers died under mysterious circumstances during the renovation. The first, a stonemason named Gregory, fell from a scaffold while working on the East Wing facade. Witnesses reported that moments before his fall, Gregory had been staring intently at something inside the room, his expression frozen in terror. The second, a carpenter called Thomas, drowned in the estate's lake despite being known as a strong swimmer who had once saved a child from the Thames. His body was discovered floating face down in the center of the lake with no signs of struggle or injury except for his eyes, which had turned completely white as if bleached. The third death was perhaps the most disturbing. A young apprentice named William was found hanging in the cellar with no obvious way to have gotten into such a position. The beam from which he hung was nearly 15 feet high with no furniture nearby that could have been used to reach it. More puzzling still, the rope around his neck showed no signs of a knot. It appeared to be a continuous loop, as if woven around his flesh. The local authorities, heavily influenced by Edward's generous donations to the county magistrate and police commissioner, ruled all 3 deaths as unfortunate accidents. The magistrate, Sir Reginald Thorpe, was a frequent guest at Edward's London gatherings and shared his interest in the occult. Later investigation would reveal that Thorpe's family had ancestral connections to the Blackwoods, though he took great pains to conceal this fact. Construction continued despite the fatalities, with new workers brought in to replace those who had died or fled. Edward offered substantial completion bonuses, doubling and then tripling the amount as difficulties mounted. Within 6 months, at an exorbitant cost, both financial and human, Addington Manor was transformed into a showcase of Victorian opulence. The final structure was a monument to excess and questionable taste. The exterior presented a harmonious Gothic Revival facade, all pointed arches and ornate stonework rising imperiously above carefully landscaped grounds. But the interior was a disorienting blend of styles and influences that reflected Edward's eclectic obsessions. Crystal chandeliers hung from Corford ceilings painted with astronomical charts of suspicious accuracy, depicting celestial bodies unknown to the astronomy of the time. Persian carpets covered polished hardwood floors inlaid with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Priceless paintings adorned walls of deep crimson and midnight blue, many depicting scenes from obscure mythological traditions, sacrificial rites and entities that were neither fully human nor fully bestial. Most striking was the library, which occupied the entire west wing of the manor. 3 stories tall with spiral staircases connecting the levels, it housed one of the finest private collections of rare books in England. Beyond the expected classics and contemporary works, Edward's collection included ancient tomes bound in materials that defied easy identification. Scholars later permitted to examine the library described texts in languages that had no known speakers, written on substances that resembled neither paper nor parchment. These books were kept in a special section behind locked glass doors, visible but inaccessible to casual visitors. Yet despite its grandeur, there was something undeniably oppressive about the atmosphere of Addington Manor. Guests invited to the elaborate housewarming celebration in December 1842 rarely stayed the night despite the treacherous winter journey that awaited them. Those who did reported troubled sleep and disturbing dreams. Lady Harrington, a close friend of Ellis's, wrote in her diary, "There is something unwholesome about the air in that house. It feels thick in one's lungs, as if it carries some invisible contamination." I woke repeatedly with the sensation of being observed, and once I could swear I saw the doorknob turning slowly, though the door remained locked. I shall not accept another invitation to Addington Manor. Friendship be damned. Eleanor Addington, once vibrant and sociable, grew increasingly withdrawn as winter deepened into a particularly harsh spring, where she had once been known for her wit and lively conversation. She now spoke little at social gatherings, her gaze distant and troubled. She dismissed her lady's maid of many years, claiming the woman was spying on her, and began to refuse food prepared by the kitchen staff, subsisting largely on tea and dry toast that she prepared herself. She spoke of hearing children's laughter in empty corridors and seeing figures dart past doorways from the corner of her eye. Most troubling to the staff was her new habit of stopping mid-sentence, cocking her head as if listening to a voice only she could hear, then responding in whispers to empty air. Edward dismissed her concerns, attributing them to female hysteria, a convenient diagnosis for any woman who dared express discomfort in Victorian England. "The house is settling," he would say with thinly veiled irritation. Nothing more. But Eleanor knew better. There was something malevolent about Addington Manor, something that seemed to feed on fear and despair. She began keeping a journal documenting the strange occurrences that Edward so readily dismissed. Her handwriting, once elegant and controlled, became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed, the pressure of her pen sometimes tearing through the paper. Her entries grew increasingly disturbed as weeks turned to months. April 18, 1843, I found William, their youngest son, speaking to the wall in the east wing. Again. When I asked who he was talking to, he said, "The sad lady who lives inside." Edward says it's merely childish imagination. But William described her in such detail. The lace collar of her dress, the pearl buttons down her back, the dark stain spreading across her abdomen. No child could invent such specifics. When I pressed him, William said the lady told him she had lived in the house long ago and that the master heard her because of the baby. I asked if she meant Edward, and William looked confused. "No, mother," she said, "it was before the fire. There has been no fire at Addington Manor in living memory." April 30, 1843. Margaret's governess gave notice today. She claims Margaret threatened her with a knife taken from the breakfast table, saying, "They told me to open you up and see what's inside." When confronted, Margaret had no memory of the incident and wept inconsolably. "The poor child hasn't been herself since we moved here. Her night terrors have worsened, and she's taken to collecting dead insects, arranging them in patterns on her windowsill." Dr. Wallace prescribed a tonic to help her sleep, but it only seems to make the nightmares more vivid. "This morning, she told me she doesn't want to be hollowed out like the others. When I asked what she meant, she stared at me as if I were a stranger." May 3, 1843. The temperature in the master bedroom dropped so severely last night that I could see my breath. Edward slept soundly while I lay awake, watching a dark figure stand motionless at the foot of our bed for hours. I was paralyzed, unable to scream or wake him. The figure seemed to be composed of shadow deeper than the darkness around it, with only the suggestion of a face, two depressions where eyes should be, and a darker slash that might have been a mouth. It made no sound, no movement. Simply watched. When the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, it dissolved like smoke. Edward found me weeping and suggested I visit Dr. Harrison for a tonic to calm my nerves. I fear he thinks I am going mad. Perhaps I am. May 17, 1843. I ventured into the East Wing today, drawn by the sound of a woman weeping. I found nothing, but the crying seemed to follow me, always just around the next corner or behind the next door. Eventually, I came to the room at the end of the corridor, the one Edward has taken as his private study. The door was locked, but I am certain the sounds emanated from within. When I pressed my ear to the wood, the weeping stopped abruptly, replaced by a whisper so close it might have been inside my own head. He will hollow you out, too. I fled, but as I reached the main staircase, I glanced back to see Edward standing outside his study door, watching me with an expression I have never seen before. Not anger, but a cold, calculating assessment, as if I were a specimen. Under glass. June 17, 1843. 3 more servants have given notice this week. That makes 11 who have left since we moved in. They whisper about rooms that lock themselves, objects that move without being touched, and voices crying out from empty rooms. The undergardener swears he saw a procession of figures in white moving across the lawn at midnight. Heading toward the old stone circle on the north edge of the property, the new nursemaid refuses to enter the children's rooms after dark, claiming she sees something standing over them as they sleep. Edward has forbidden any discussion of these incidents, threatening immediate dismissal without reference for anyone spreading hysterical nonsense. He grows more distant by the day, spending hours locked in his study or the East Wing library. When he does emerge, there is a feverish gleam in his eyes and a tremor in his hands that he cannot quite control. July 2, 1843. The twins have developed a peculiar game they call the Hollow People. They take turns standing perfectly still while the other drapes them in sheets and pretends to extract something invisible from their chest. When I asked Alexander what they were removing, he replied matter-of-factly, "The light inside, Mother. That's what they want from us." Victoria nodded solemnly and added, "The hungry ones behind the walls need it to make themselves real. I've forbidden the game, but I hear them playing it when they think I'm not listening. Last night, I observed them through a crack in their bedroom door. They weren't using sheets anymore, but standing in the moonlight, making precise cutting motions in the air before their bodies. Most disturbing was their synchronicity. They moved as if controlled by a single mind." As Eleanor's mental state deteriorated, Edward became increasingly absent, spending long hours in his study or away on business. His complexion took on a grayish pallor, and he lost weight rapidly, his once robust frame becoming almost skeletal. Yet, there was a feverish energy about him, a manic intensity that manifested in bursts of activity followed by days of near catatonia. The household staff reported that he would sometimes be found standing motionless in odd corners of the house, staring intently at blank walls or empty air, mumbling equations and phrases in languages none of them recognized. The children were largely left in the care of nannies and tutors, most of whom rarely lasted more than a few weeks before fleeing the oppressive atmosphere of Addington Manor. Young William developed a stutter and began wetting his bed. Margaret was caught multiple times attempting to harm smaller children from the village when they ventured too close to the estate boundaries. The twins, Alexander and Victoria, seemed to communicate in a private language, falling silent whenever adults entered the room. Only Charles, the eldest at 16, appeared relatively unaffected, though servants noted he had taken to carrying a silver letter opener at all times and barricading his bedroom door at night. By autumn, the situation had deteriorated further. Eleanor's journal entries became increasingly fragmented and difficult to decipher. She wrote of geometries that hurt the eyes and voices that speak from behind time. She drew diagrams that made no mathematical sense, yet created a disturbing sense of depth when stared at for too long. Several pages contained nothing but the same phrase, repeated hundreds of times. They are hollowing us out one by one. The turning point came on a stormy night in November 1843. Eleanor, unable to sleep, wandered the corridors of the East Wing, an area of the house that Edward had inexplicably declared off limits to everyone, including family. The last coherent entry in her journal, dated November 13, describes her decision to defy this prohibition. I can bear it no longer. The sounds from behind the walls have become unbearable. Not just weeping now, but screams that slice through my dreams and leave me bleeding into wakefulness. Edward has forbidden any of us from entering the East Wing's third floor. But he himself spends hours there, returning with a look of terrible exultation that chills my blood. Tonight, while he is away in London, I shall discover what secret he guards so jealously. May God forgive my trespass and protect me from what I might find. What she discovered there would alter the course of the Addington family forever. According to fragmentary accounts pieced together later from servants' testimonies and Charles S. hidden journal, Eleanor used a stolen key to access the locked staircase leading to the third floor of the East Wing. The area had been completely transformed from its original design. The multiple rooms shown on the architect's plans had been converted into a single vast chamber with an oddly disorienting layout. Corners that seemed more or less than 90 degrees, a ceiling that appeared to recede infinitely upward in some places while pressing claustrophobically low in others. But it was the floor that drew Eleanor's horrified attention. The expensive Persian carpets found throughout the rest of the manor were absent here. Instead, the entire floor was covered in an intricate mosaic composed of thousands of tiny tiles and various materials. Some stone, some metal, some materials she could not identify. Together, they formed an immense geometric pattern that seemed to shift and pulsate in the flickering candle light. At the center of this pattern was a circular depression about 6 feet in diameter. Behind a false wall concealed by a tapestry, Eleanor found a hidden chamber. The room was small and windowless, its walls covered in strange symbols etched into the stone. In the center stood a pedestal holding a leather-bound book. Eleanor would later describe it in her journal as ancient beyond reckoning. Its cover fashioned from some material I dare not contemplate too deeply. The pages contained writings in several languages, some recognizable as Latin and Greek, others utterly foreign to Eleanor's educated eye. Interspersed among the text were disturbing illustrations depicting ritual sacrifice and communion with entities that seemed neither human nor animal, but some horrific combination of both. Careful examination of these images revealed a terrible pattern. Each depicted a circular chamber with a distinctive floor pattern, identical to the one in the room Eleanor had just left. Most disturbing were the illustrations showing human figures arranged in specific positions around the central depression, their chests open to reveal not the expected internal organs, but vast starry voids, as if each human body contained an entire cosmos that was being somehow harvested or channeled. The final pages of the book contain names and dates spanning centuries, with Edward Addington's name and the date December 21, 1843, the winter solstice, inscribed in fresh ink. Eleanor had discovered Edward's darkest secret. His fortune had not been built on business acumen alone, but on forbidden knowledge and terrible pacts with forces beyond human understanding. The renovations of Addington Manor had not been merely aesthetic. They had transformed the property into a massive sigil, a beacon to attract entities from beyond the veil of our reality. And the Deaths that had occurred during construction had not been accidents, but deliberate sacrifices. Their life energy used to power whatever terrible mechanism Edward was creating. When Edward discovered Eleanor in the hidden chamber, his rage was terrifying. According to Harriet Brown, a housemaid who had followed Eleanor out of concern for her mistress's safety, Edward's face underwent a horrifying transformation as he confronted his wife. "It weren't natural what I saw." Harriet later testified to a parish priest seeking absolution for her failure to intervene. His lordship's face seemed to ripple, like there was something moving beneath the skin. And his eyes, God help me, but they weren't human eyes anymore. They were like windows opening onto somewhere else, somewhere vast and cold and hungry. Servants reported hearing shouting followed by an eerie silence. Most disturbing was Eleanor's scream, which began as a normal expression of human terror, but transformed mid-cry into something that defied description, a sound that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously, modulating in ways that human vocal cords should not be capable of producing. The next morning, Edward announced that Eleanor had suffered a nervous collapse and would be recuperating at a private sanatorium in Switzerland. He produced letters supposedly written by Eleanor over the following months, describing her treatment and gradual recovery, but the handwriting bore only a passing resemblance to her own. She was never seen again. In the household accounts ledger, there is an entry dated November 14, 1843. The day after Eleanor's disappearance, for an unusually large delivery of quicklime, a substance commonly used to accelerate decomposition and mask the odor of decay. The delivery was made to the East Wing, and workers were forbidden from entering the area for several days afterward. When they were finally permitted to resume their duties, they reported that the mosaic floor in the large chamber had been extensively cleaned with several damaged tiles replaced. In the months that followed, Edward's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He dismissed all but the most essential staff and kept his children under strict isolation. No visitors were permitted and the children were withdrawn from their schools and social engagements. A physician, Dr. James Morrison, was summoned regularly to the manor, but the nature of his treatments remained undocumented. Local gossip suggested that the doctor, once respected in the community, had developed a laden addiction and substantial gambling debt shortly before being retained by Edward Addington. Locals reported strange lights emanating from the manor at odd hours and unsettling sounds carrying across the moors on still nights. Sounds that resembled chanting in no known language, punctuated by what some described as the weeping of countless voices, all crying out in unison. Farmers reported livestock being found dead near the property boundaries, their bodies drained of blood without any visible wounds. Most disturbing were the reports of missing children from the surrounding villages. 7 disappeared between December 1843 and June 1844, all within a 10 miles radius of Addington Manor. Official investigations attributed these disappearances to accidents or runaways, but local families remained convinced of a more sinister explanation. The eldest Addington child, Charles, began documenting his own observations in a hidden journal after his mother's disappearance. His writings, discovered decades later, concealed in a hollowed-out section of the manor's west wall, provide a chilling account of the family's descent into madness and the true horror that was unfolding within the walls of Addington Manor. "Father has changed," wrote 16-year-old Charles in December 1843. His eyes seemed different, somehow deeper, with a strange gleam that was not there before. He spends hours locked in the East Wing, and when he emerges, he often doesn't recognize us immediately. Last week, he called me by a name I've never heard before, then looked confused and retired to his study without supper. By spring of 1844, the remaining servants reported that Edward had taken to sleepwalking, often found standing motionless in the children's rooms in the dead of night, watching them sleep with an unnatural stillness. The children themselves began exhibiting Disturbing behaviors. 10-year-old William was discovered mutilating small animals in the garden. 12-year-old Margaret began speaking in languages she had never studied. The twins, Alexander and Victoria, developed an obsession with death, creating elaborate funeral rituals for their dolls and pets. Only Charles seemed to maintain his sanity, though his journal entries betray a growing fear that whatever had taken hold of his family might claim him, too. He began planning an escape, secretly corresponding with his mother's brother in London. "I fear what father is becoming," Charles wrote in April 1844. "Yesterday, I saw him in the garden at dawn, burying something wrapped in bloody sheets. When he returned to the house, there was soil beneath his fingernails and a serenity to his expression that chilled me to the bone. I have not seen Margaret since the previous afternoon." Charles never managed to escape. On May 17, 1844, a fire broke out in the east wing of Addington Manor. By the time the local fire brigade arrived, the blaze had consumed most of the house. They found Edward Addington in the garden, calmly watching the inferno with what witnesses described as an expression of rapturous fulfillment. Inside the charred remains of the manor, authorities discovered a scene of unspeakable horror. The bodies of all 5 Addington children were found in the cellar, arranged in a precise geometric pattern around a stone altar. Forensic examination would later reveal that the children had not died in the fire, but had been systematically sacrificed in what appeared to be an elaborate ritual. Edward Addington was arrested and committed to Beedham Asylum, where he spent the remainder of his days in seemingly catatonic silence. However, asylum records indicate that he would occasionally become animated during certain astronomical alignments, attempting to draw complex symbols with whatever materials were available, often his own blood. The Addington case might have faded into obscurity, dismissed as the isolated madness of one depraved individual, had it not been for what happened next. Despite the horrific events and the manor's almost complete destruction, a distant cousin of Edward's, James Addington, claimed the property in 1850 and set about rebuilding it according to the original plans. James was a respected scholar, with no known history of mental instability or cruelty. His decision to resurrect Addington Manor puzzled many, but he dismissed concerns with rational explanations about family legacy and the quality of the remaining structure. Within 2 years, the manor stood once again, an exact replica of its former self. History, as they say, has a way of repeating itself. Within months of moving in with his wife and 3 children, James began exhibiting the same obsessive behaviors that had characterized Edward's decline. His wife, Rebecca, documented increasingly disturbing changes in her husband's personality and strange occurrences within the newly rebuilt manor. James spent 3 days and nights in the East Wing without emerging even for meals. She wrote to her sister in 1853, when he finally appeared, he looked somehow younger, more vital. Yet, there was something wrong about his eyes. They seemed to reflect light differently, like a cat's eyes in darkness. When I expressed concern about his absence, he smiled in a way that made my blood run cold and said, "I was never absent, my dear. I've been here all along watching you sleep." The pattern established by Edward Addington repeated itself with frightening precision through James and subsequent generations of Addingtons who inhabited the manor. Each time the family patriarch would discover something in the East Wing that changed him. Each time family members would vanish or die under mysterious circumstances. And each time, locals would report strange lights and sounds emanating from the property on specific dates corresponding to ancient pagan festivals. Parish records from the neighboring village of Thornfield document a disturbing trend. During the periods when the Addington family was in residence at the manor, disappearances of local children increased dramatically. Between 1850 and 1870, 23 children vanished without trace within a 10 miles radius of Addington Manor. Local authorities investigated, but could never find sufficient evidence to implicate the increasingly reclusive Addington family. By the turn of the century, Addington Manor had been rebuilt 3 times following mysterious fires, and 4 generations of Addingtons had met violent ends within its walls. Still, distant relatives would emerge to claim the property, drawn by some inexplicable compulsion to restore the manor and continue whatever dark purpose it served. In 1901, the property passed to Richard Addington, a successful London physician with a young family and no previous connection to the more sinister aspects of his ancestry. He approached the reconstruction with scientific skepticism, determined to dispel the superstitious nonsense surrounding his family name. The so-called Addington curse is nothing more than a confluence of unfortunate circumstances, perhaps exacerbated by environmental factors such as carbon monoxide from faulty heating systems, which could explain the reported hallucinations and erratic behaviors, he wrote in a letter to a colleague. I intend to document everything methodically and finally put these ridiculous rumors to rest. Richard installed electric lighting throughout the manor, a modern innovation at the time, and hired a team of scientists to analyze the air quality, water supply, and structural integrity of the building. His rational approach seemed promising initially, but within 6 months, his correspondence took a darker turn. There is something here, he wrote in increasingly agitated handwriting. Something that defies scientific explanation. I've seen it moving through the walls at night. I've heard it whispering in languages that have been dead for millennia. The children hear it, too. They've started drawing pictures of it. Elizabeth, his wife, says I'm working too hard, that my mind is playing tricks. But how can we all be experiencing the same delusion? His final letter, dated November 12, 1902, contains a disturbing revelation. The East Wing. Always the East Wing. I've discovered why. The original foundations remain intact beneath the newer construction. Edward wasn't the first. The Blackwoods before him, and God knows how many others before them. They all found it. The chamber beneath the East Wing. It's far older than the manor. Older perhaps than England itself. The symbols on the walls match nothing in any archaeological record. Yet I recognize them somehow. They speak to something primitive in my brain. Something that existed before humanity crawled from the primordial ooze. God help me. I understand now what must be done. What has always been done. 3 days later, Richard's wife and children were found dead in their beds, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Richard himself was discovered in the cellar beneath the East Wing, his body contorted in an impossible position, surrounded by arcane symbols drawn in a mixture of blood and ash. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the responding officers would later require extensive psychiatric treatment for what they witnessed at the scene. Addington Manor was abandoned after the tragedy of 1902. The property fell into disrepair, becoming a magnet for thrill-seekers, occultists, and the morbidly curious. Local authorities eventually declared the structure unsafe and barricaded the grounds, but trespassers continued to find their way in. Many never came out again. In 1923, a group of Cambridge scholars specializing in anthropology and ancient religions gained legal access to the property for academic research. Led by Professor Walter Hartley, they intended to document the unusual symbols reported in the cellar and compare them to known occult traditions. Only one member of the expedition, a graduate student named Thomas Piper, returned alive. His account of what happened was so outlandish that he was initially committed to an asylum. His journals, however, provide the most comprehensive documentation of what may have been happening at Addington Manor for generations. The symbols in the cellar are not static. Piper wrote, they shift when not directly observed, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Professor Hartley believed they represent a form of non-Euclidean mathematics, equations designed to solve problems of dimensional transit. In simpler terms, the entire manor is a machine, a door to somewhere else. Piper's account suggests that the Addington family had been serving as caretakers of this door for generations, willingly or unwillingly. Each patriarch would discover the truth and become consumed by it, driven to maintain the integrity of the dimensional gateway through increasingly horrific sacrifices. What lies beyond the door cannot be described in human language, Piper continued. Hartley opened it. God help us all. He actually opened it. I saw only a glimpse as I fled, but that glimpse was enough to shatter my understanding of reality. The others weren't as fortunate. Their screams still echo in my dreams, but it wasn't pain they were expressing. It was rapture. Thomas Piper spent the rest of his life in self-imposed isolation, creating intricate paintings that attempted to capture what he had witnessed. The few surviving works are housed in a secure facility at Miskatonic University in Massachusetts, available for viewing only with special permission, due to the documented psychological effects they have on observers. Following the Cambridge incident, the British government quietly acquired the Addington property. Official records indicate it was repurposed as a military storage facility during World War II, but declassified documents from the 1990s reveal a different story. Between 1939 and 1945, a specialized unit of British intelligence known as the Extraordinary Threats Division, ETD, occupied the manor, studying the phenomena reported there for potential application in the war effort. Colonel James Blackwood, a name that raises disturbing questions about his possible connection to the original owners of the property, led the ETD operations at Addington Manor. His official reports describe anomalous energies and localized reality distortions centered around the East Wing. Whatever exists beneath Addington Manor defies conventional understanding, Blackwood wrote in a top-secret memorandum dated June 1943. It appears to respond to human intention and emotion, particularly fear and desire. The symbolic configurations in the cellar function as a form of programming language, allowing limited control over the phenomena, but at significant risk to the operator's psychological stability. The ETD conducted numerous experiments at the site, most of which ended disastrously. Test subjects exposed to the cellar for extended periods exhibited rapid personality deterioration, followed by either catatonia or extreme violence. Several researchers reported encountering doppelgangers of themselves or long-deceased family members in the corridors of the East Wing. Most disturbing were the temporal anomalies. Clocks in the manor ran at different speeds depending on their proximity to the cellar. In one documented incident, a researcher entered the East Wing for what he perceived as 20 minutes, but emerged 3 days later with no awareness of the time discrepancy. His journal contained over 200 pages of writing. He had no memory of producing mostly the same phrase repeated in increasingly distorted handwriting. They are watching from behind the walls. By 1944, the casualties among ETD personnel had become unsustainable. Colonel Blackwood made the decision to seal the cellar with reinforced concrete and withdraw from the property. His final report contained a recommendation that Addington Manor be destroyed completely, the land salted, and the location stricken from all official records. What we have contained here is not defeated, he wrote. It is merely imprisoned, and imprisonment is not a permanent solution. There will always be those drawn to this place, those who hear the whispers promising power and knowledge beyond human comprehension. God help us if they succeed where we failed. The British government did not follow Blackwood's recommendation. Instead, they maintained a small monitoring station near the property, staffed by rotating personnel who were told they were tracking weather patterns. Surveillance continued quietly for decades with periodic reports of unusual phenomena, lights where no lights should b. Temperature fluctuations and electronic equipment failing inexplicably. In 1976, budget cuts led to the abandonment of even this minimal oversight. Addington Manor was left to rot, surrounded by overgrown grounds and protected only by no trespassing signs and local superstition. For nearly 20 years, it remained undisturbed, a cancerous memory fading slowly from public consciousness. Then in 1995, American tech entrepreneur Victor Reynolds purchased the property for what real estate records describe as a nominal fee. Reynolds had made his fortune in early internet technologies and had a well-documented interest in the paranormal. His stated intention was to renovate the historic manor and convert it into a private research facility dedicated to exploring the boundaries of conventional science. What Reynolds didn't reveal publicly was his connection to an obscure cult organization known as the Morphic Resonance Society. Founded in the 1920s, the society believed that certain locations served as focal points for consciousness itself, places where the barrier between thought and reality became permeable. Addington Manor featured prominently in their literature as a theoretical alpha site, the most powerful such location in Europe. Reynolds moved into the partially renovated manor in the spring of 1996. Accompanied by a team of researchers from various scientific disciplines, all members of the Morphic Resonance Society, they brought with them cutting-edge technology, early brain-computer interfaces, quantum field detectors, and prototype reality mapping systems. What the Addington stumbled upon through occult rituals, we will master through technology, Reynolds wrote in the project's mission statement. The gateway beneath Addington Manor isn't supernatural. It's a natural phenomenon that pre-scientific humans interpreted through a mystical lens. With the right tools and methodologies, we can strip away the superstition and harness what may be the most significant scientific discovery in human history. For 6 months, the research proceeded methodically. Reynolds published regular updates on a private server for Society members, documenting measurable phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Localized gravitational anomalies, spontaneous temperature fluctuations, and most intriguingly, what he described as information bleed, the appearance of data on their computers that none of the team had input. The entity or entities beyond the gateway appear to be attempting communication. Reynolds wrote in August 1996, the information manifests as complex mathematical equations and fragmented text in multiple languages, including several that our linguists cannot identify. Most provocative is the recurring phrase, which roughly translates to "the door swings both ways." In September 1996, Reynolds' team made a breakthrough. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered that the concrete seal installed by the ETD in 1944 had fractured, creating a small opening into the chamber below. Environmental samples revealed trace particles of unknown composition with properties that defied analysis. The particles exhibit quantum superposition on a macroscopic scale, noted Dr. Elena Chen, the team's physicist. They exist in multiple states simultaneously and appear to respond to conscious observation. In simpler terms, they become what we expect them to be. This suggests that whatever lies beyond the gateway exists in a reality where thought directly influences matter. Reynolds made the decision to widen the opening and send in remote-controlled drones equipped with cameras and various sensors. The footage they recovered was disturbing in its implications. The chamber beyond the concrete seal had expanded far beyond its original dimensions, now appearing as a vast cathedral-like space with non-Euclidean geometry, angles that shouldn't be possible, distances that seem to change when viewed from different perspectives. The walls were covered in the same shifting symbols described by Thomas Piper decades earlier, but now they moved with unmistakable purpose, responding to the presence of the drones. Most unsettling were the glimpses of movement at the periphery of the camera's range. Suggestions of forms that resembled humans but distorted as if viewed through rippling water. We are being observed as much as we are observing. Reynolds noted, the entities are learning from us, adapting to our methods of perception. Each incursion provides them with more information about our reality. We must consider the possibility that our research is serving their purposes rather than our own. Despite these concerns, Reynolds pushed forward. In October 1996, he proposed what he called a controlled communion using the brain-computer interfaces to allow a human mind to perceive the gateway reality directly while remaining physically in our world. After much debate, Dr. Marcus Wayland, the team's neurologist, volunteered for the procedure. The experiment was conducted on October 31, 1996. Sam Hain on the Celtic calendar, one of the dates when historical accounts suggested the boundary between worlds was thinnest at Addington Manor. Wayan was connected to an array of monitoring equipment in a specially prepared room in the East Wing directly above the chamber. What happened next is documented in the emergency recording automatically activated when the manor systems detected a critical failure. The audio reveals Wan's initial observations as his consciousness expanded into the gateway reality. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Geometry is impossible in our space. Colors I've never seen before that shouldn't exist. There are entities here watching me. They are curious. They are... Oh, God. They recognize me. How is that possible? They are calling me by name. But not the name I use now. They are calling me Addington." At that point, Wan began convulsing. His vital signs spiked dramatically, and the brain-computer interface recorded activity in regions of his brain, normally dormant in conscious humans. As Reynolds and the medical team rushed to disconnect him, Wayland began speaking in multiple voices simultaneously. Male, female, old, young, all emanating from his throat in a horrifying chorus. "We have always been here," the voices said. "Before your kind crawled from the oceans, before your world cooled from cosmic fire. We have waited and you have served. Generation after generation, you have opened the way." Addington, Blackwood, Reynolds. Names change, but blood remembers. The door swings both ways and now we return the favor. We come through. The recording ends with screams and the sound of an explosion. Emergency services responding to reports of a fire at the manor found a scene of carnage. The East Wing had been obliterated by what appeared to be an explosion originating in the cellar. The bodies of Reynolds and his team were discovered throughout the property, each displaying injuries that first responders described as inconsistent with any known form of trauma. Most disturbing was the condition of Dr. Want's remains. His body was found intact, but empty. Medical examiners would later report that every internal organ had been removed with surgical precision, yet there were no incisions or openings in his skin. The official report concluded that the injuries were consistent with exposure to an unknown explosive device with unusual pressure wave properties, but first responders knew what they had seen. The Addington property was once again abandoned, this time with a more robust government response. The entire area was designated a restricted zone under the pretense of chemical contamination. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter and satellite monitoring was established to track any unusual activity. For nearly 2 decades, the site remained quiet. Then in 2014, a series of geological disturbances began occurring in the vicinity. Minor earthquakes that didn't match the region's seismic profile. Groundwater near the property showed traces of unidentifiable compounds, and locals reported electronic devices malfunctioning within a 5 m radius of the former manor. In 2015, a specialized containment team was dispatched to re-inspect the site. Their findings have never been made public, but satellite imagery shows the construction of a massive concrete structure over the former location of Addington Manor's East Wing. Power consumption records indicate significant electrical usage at the site, consistent with high-powered containment systems. Classified documents leaked in 2018 suggest that whatever was contained beneath Addington Manor may no longer be fully imprisoned. Reports of missing time, strange dreams, and impossible geometries appearing in the architecture of nearby buildings have increased exponentially. Most concerning are the children born in the region since 2016. Hospital staff have documented unusual birthmarks on many of them, patterns that bear a striking resemblance to the symbols described in the Addington cellar. The most recent development came just last year when a routine DNA analysis of the regional population revealed a startling pattern. Genetic markers associated with the historical Addington family have appeared in over 60% of children born within a 20 m radius of the manor since 2017, regardless of their parents' ancestry. What does this mean for the future? The pattern established throughout the Addington history suggests a cycle that has now entered a new phase. Each generation of Addingtons discovered the gateway, attempted to control it, and ultimately fell victim to whatever lies beyond. Now, if the genetic analysis is correct, we may be witnessing the largest cohort of Addingtons ever to exist, all drawn to the same location by forces they cannot understand. Government monitoring stations have detected increasing fluctuations in the electromagnetic field surrounding the containment structure. Night vision surveillance shows brief moments when the concrete itself appears to become transparent, revealing glimpses of something vast moving beneath. Most disturbing are the dreams reported by locals. Identical dreams of a manor rebuilt, grander than before, with doors that open onto impossible vistas and a voice that whispers, "Come home." The history of the Addingtons is not merely a tale of one family's descent into madness and depravity. It is a warning about doors that should remain closed and knowledge that humans were never meant to possess. The gateway beneath Addington Manor has claimed generations of caretakers, each believing they could control what they had discovered, each ultimately serving as nothing more than a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension. As we conclude this dark chapter of hidden history, we must ask ourselves an unsettling question. If the pattern holds true, what happens when not just one family, but an entire community of genetic Addingtons reaches maturity? What ceremony might they perform, knowingly or unknowingly? And what might finally emerge from behind the curtain that has mercifully separated our reality from what waits beyond? For those interested in visiting the region, we must emphasize that the former Addington property remains strictly off-limits to the public. The official explanation of chemical contamination should be respected. Those who have attempted to breach the perimeter have invariably been apprehended by security personnel. At least those who have returned at all. To the residents of the surrounding communities, particularly those with children born since 2016, medical authorities recommend regular psychological evaluations and immediate reporting of any unusual dreams or compulsions, especially those involving geometric patterns or whispered instructions. The story of the Addingtons serves as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, some doors not meant to be opened. Behind the grand facade of Addington Manor, behind the curtains of conventional reality, something else has always existed, patient, ancient, and hungry. And if the pattern of history is any indication, it is closer now to emerging than ever before. Sleep well. And remember, if you dream of a manor on the moors with an east wing that beckons you forward, do not enter. Some invitations once accepted can never be rescinded. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, keep the lights on and never look too long into the dark corners of the past. What looks back might recognize you. Should you find yourself troubled by dreams of a grand manor on the misty moors or hear whispers from behind your walls, remember this. The Addingtons were not the first to fall victim to forces beyond human comprehension. Nor will they be the last. Even now in homes and buildings across the world, the boundaries between realities grow thin in certain places. The hungry ones are always watching, always waiting for someone curious or desperate enough to invite them in. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the makeup. If you enjoyed this tale of existential horror, please consider supporting the Ghastly Journal by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing with those who appreciate the darker side of history. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these forgotten stories that perhaps in some cases were deliberately buried. Until our next journey into the shadows, I bid you a restful sleep, if such a thing is still possible after what you've just heard.